I believe that to the extent that you know your story, to the extent that you embrace your unique life experiences, to the extent to which you can look back at your life and say, yeah, I'm not a mistake. I think all those things that I've gone through has purpose and meaning and value. And to the extent that you can actually embrace all of that is the extent to which now you can be liberated to pour into the stories of other people.
Hey, welcome to the Overflow podcast. This is a podcast on a mission to discover how you and I can live a life of abundance, full to overflowing. In this third season, we've been exploring the inspirational and personal stories of some friends and how they have seen God transform their lives and bring them to the point of overflow. This is episode 25. My name is Karl Lindsay and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Philip Milosavljevic. How's it going, Philip?
Karl, buenos dias, señor.
I don't even know how to respond to that anymore. It's been months since I jumped into Spanish on Duolingo.
Oh, man. Come on. You got to know that one. How are you? Buenos dias or good day. I don't even know Spanish.
You don't even know what you're talking about. Well, today we have the last episode of season 3.
Oh, I'm crying. Or you could then throw in sound effects right now of cymbals and fireworks and cheering. Yeah. Sound the cue now.
Hey, thanks so much for listening, everybody. It's been great to have you join the journey and tuning in every week as we kind of go on this journey together towards this abundant life, the overflowing life.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to our listening audience. Yeah. It is really, really an incredible journey to be able to be on this with you, and for sharing, for commenting, for speaking to me personally, those of you who live locally in my area that are listening to this. It's just really helpful to know what's been helpful to you. That's really the reason why we built this and created this podcast. It was simply to be a tool, a resource to grow people in this overflowing journey.
Yeah. So season 4, we're going to be sitting down with a mental health therapist and diving into some big topics. We kind of hinted at that last week. We're looking at anxiety and depression as key moods that kind of offset our feeling of overflow, if we want to put it that way.
Oh, yeah.
We kind of get caught in their grips with no apparent light at the end of the tunnel, oftentimes. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sitting down with her and she'll be helping us identify it and tell us why we kind of are dealing with it and then how to deal with it. So those are 2 big topics we'll be talking about in season 4. If you've got questions that you would love to hear the answer to that relate to anxiety and depression, please send them in. You can visit choosetooverflow.com/season4, where you can share them anonymously. And if you've been challenged with these demons in the past, or you're currently on that journey, we'd love to hear your story as well. You can submit that at choosetooverflow.com/season4. That's the number 4. Season 4. So to finish out this season, Philip, we've got Kevin Wilson. He's a friend of yours, friend of mine. Goes back a little while. You met him at Andrews University as well?
You know, I knew Kevin back when we were both in theology. He was, I think, a freshman in theology.
Right.
And I was a senior.
Okay.
So I met him right when he was starting out.
And you were finishing.
And I was finishing. This guy, okay, friends who are listening right now, you've got to understand who Kevin is. He blew up on TikTok. He's become now this digital evangelist for chai, but at the same time, he uses chai literally just as a medium to convey Christian principles that really are very subtle. He's not overt about his Christianity, but he has people that will comment and write. I mean, I read some of the comments that come on his TikTok. Man, if I was in your youth group, I would still be a Christian today. I wish I understood the Bible like you tell it. And he doesn't even say anything really about the Bible or this or that. Right. He just kind of has these subtle things that happen. Like he'll be making chai in his church at a youth group ministry event, you know? And so it's just like very, very subtle. And yet it's so thoughtful. Now Kevin is regularly on podcasts, on conferences. He speaks all over. He really has some amazing wisdom that we're so excited to share with you right now.
Chai is something that gets poured out. And so we wanted to talk to him about something he talks about a lot, is pouring out our story and what that looks like when it comes to interacting with other people. So let's play this conversation with Kevin Wilson. Kevin, welcome to the Overflow podcast. Good to have you.
Thank you for the invitation, Karl. Good to see you after a long time.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember. I distinctly remember meeting you back at Andrews University 10 years ago. I don't know when you came to the country, but yeah, when I first met you, you were working behind the counter at the cafeteria and serving all the food and stuff. And you picked up on the fact that I was an Australian. And 2011, the Cricket World Cup was happening. And so we connected over a love of a sport that no one else in around us could have kind of connected with us. So that was a meaningful moment to me, just come to a new culture and connect with someone who had some similarities there. That was good.
Yeah, no, for sure. The feeling is mutual. I know there's just not a lot of people at Andrews, at least not at that point, who are familiar with cricket. So it was really nice to kind of shoot the breeze with somebody who had had a similar passion for the sport. Even though, you know, we Sri Lankans and Australians, you know, our rivalry kind of goes back quite a while back. But it's okay. No, it's all still friendly, and but it's good stuff.
Yeah. Well, we're talking on this podcast about personal growth in a spiritual direction. We kind of chasing the overflowing life. So I want to ask you, when you hear the idea of an overflowing life, what comes to mind?
I think an overflowing life to me is a life that is characterized more by its inputs rather than its outputs.
That's good. Yeah.
And and this is not to say that the outputs don't matter. I mean, and what I mean by outputs is things like our responses, our reactions, our creations, our creative output. That's what I mean by outputs. But I do think that an overflowing life is a life that has a lot more streams of good input,
right?
So from which one can draw from in order to produce meaningful output. So to that end, I think for me personally, life orientation marked or characterized by the way of Jesus, to me, is kind of gives rise to that type of life, I think. When Jesus talks about, you know, I have come so that you may have life and have it abundantly, that's the verse that my mind immediately goes to when it comes to an overflowing life.
No, I like that idea, inputs and outputs, just thinking about the input rather than trying to focus on producing the output. That's good. So let's dive into the idea. I want to hear about your story, but over the last 12 months, you've received a lot of attention for the content you've been sharing on TikTok and Instagram, and you're teaching others to make a superior cup of chai. But what you're embedding in those short videos is messages that pour life and value into the viewer. So that's what we want to talk to you about today. We've been hearing in this season a number of inspirational stories from people who are living an overflowing life. And so as we wrap up this season with chatting with you, I thought we could talk to you about the idea of pouring ourselves out and pouring out our story. You call yourself a cross-culture Christian. Tell us a little bit about that journey of life that you've been on.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, I think just the idea of pouring out, I mean, it's perfect because of what I've been doing recently, and there's just a lot of resonance just with that terminology for sure. So cross-culture Christian, it's kind of a moniker that I give myself as a way to encapsulate the different parts of who I am and what I represent. I grew up in Sri Lanka. I was born in Sri Lanka, and lived there till I was about 12 years old. And
Okay.
then I moved to the Middle East, to Oman, and I lived there till I was 18. And then I came to the States. And so throughout my entire life, and I'm 30 right now, I've had the privilege of interacting with different cultures, with different people, with different who have different stories than me. So cross culture Christian has two different ways, two different meanings. On one sense, on the one hand, cross culture Christian means that I am a Christian across different cultures.
Yep.
On the other hand, cross culture Christian has this emphasis on the cross, because I think at this point in my life journey that the cross of Jesus Christ, or at least what that represents, as the foundation of Christianity, as the cornerstone of the life orientation as described by the way of Jesus, is for me the constant, the standard, the navigation piece, the GPS, as it were, as I encounter and as I go through different cultures and meet different people from different areas and walks of life. So the cross there is an important piece. So in the first definition, the culture is the important piece. In the second definition, the cross is. And so yeah, cross culture Christian. I hope that it somehow communicates all those ideas. At least to me, it does, and so that
Yeah.
I find that helpful.
I like that. You're wrapping your culture around the cross. That's great. So growing up from Sri Lanka to Oman and then now the US, you've seen so much, and it's brought you to this place where, at least from the outside, you're living. It appears to me, it appears to others, that you may be living an overflowing life, one that's blessing others. So can you talk to us about some key moments and decisions in your life, maybe a story or two that have set you up to be where you are today? Or maybe you just arrived here serendipitously? Like, were there key moments?
Well, you're being generous there with your with saying that I'm living an overflowing life. At least I think we're all trying our best to do that in whatever way possible, whatever means, with whatever means that we have access to. Yeah, I think there are a couple of key moments that have helped me to be the person that I am today. There's probably a lot more than what I can share right now, but the first thing that comes to my mind is the community that I experienced in Maryland in the United States. So when I first came to the United States, I came to Maryland. That was my first port of entry, and I was 18 years old, just left the country, Oman. I left my family for the first time.
Wow, yeah.
Came to the country, 2 suitcases and a backpack, and with a couple of $100. It's your typical kind of immigrant story, I guess, I suppose. But I was feeling feeling very lonely, feeling out of place for sure. So I'm really, really thankful, and I'm eternally grateful for the friends and the community that I found in Maryland. So I want to mention a couple of people in particular. The first people that I want to mention is my youth group in the church there that I joined.
How long were you there before you went out to Andrews University?
About a year, like 1 year.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a long time. Not a long time. So the youth group, they really accepted me. They gave me a place to belong. So that place, that community became my home.
Yeah.
Then I didn't have a place to stay, and I'm so thankful for a family who openly welcomed me into their homes, and I was able to stay there for free, really, till I actually went to Andrews. And so without the kindness of that family, I don't think I'll be here. I'll be here where I am at today. So community is definitely key. So that's one aspect. Then the other thing that I think about is when I was at Andrews, there was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Kulasekara, and he was an older guy, and so he was such a mentor to me, and he was one of many mentors. But I mention him specifically because he is Sri Lankan, And for me, as a 19-year-old kid trying to find his way in a completely different country, Dr. K, as a lot of people affectionately called him, for me was an ideal situation. He was this person that I could be, a couple of years from now. And so to be able to see what life could be from the perspective of someone from who shared my own culture
Yeah.
was very powerful and very formative for my development. And so, yeah, community representation, it's really powerful. And then also my best friends, two guys who also came to my wedding. They were best men for my wedding. There was a point in my undergraduate experience where I kind of gave up on
Wow.
faith
Yeah.
altogether. I took a more agnostic posture towards religion and theology, Christianity specifically. And these boys, they showed unconditional acceptance. They knew what I was struggling with. They knew the doubts that I was fighting and wrestling with, and yet they still decided to, or chose to, accept me and treat me as if nothing has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So their kindness, coupled with haunting memories of my father praying for me on the bedside as a kid growing up, I remember those memories. And uh, revisiting the reasons for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, or at least reasons to actually believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. All those things kind of reintroduced me to Jesus in a way that I haven't been reintroduced to him before. So all of those things were formative, man. And I think I'm, all of that pushed me towards this journey of just trying to make sense of the world and my world through the way of Jesus.
Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing is it was all relationship driven, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like a core piece of it is definitely relationship. Yep.
Yeah, that's powerful. Talk to me a little bit about the Sri Lankan culture. Back in July, you sent out one of your weekly emails that highlighted this idea of shramadana. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And it caught my attention because we just launched this podcast and you were making this connection to pouring yourself out. And I was just seeing the word overflow or the overflow idea everywhere. So what is this idea all about? And yeah, how does it tie into the Sri Lankan culture?
Yeah, so shramadana is basically a word used to describe community service.
Okay.
In Sinhalese, one of the languages spoken in Sri Lanka. And when people want to do a shramadana, it typically means that you're getting together groups of people for the sole purpose of working on a project. Those projects can look like either building a house or cleaning up a dilapidated part of the town or the village, or just trying to fix something that's been broken with the help of other people. Completely volunteer based. Nobody's getting paid for any of this stuff. So when you say shramadana, they just understood that, hey, we're going to come to the place, roll up our sleeves and get to work.
Right.
So I clearly remember when I was a kid, we had to build. One of my aunts, they got some land in the village of my grandmother, and they needed to build a house. And I clearly remember us working with my father and my mom and so many other adults, just kind of doing our best to build a home from the ground up, really. And
cool.
We remember making concrete blocks and cutting pieces of wood. It took a couple of days, really, and looking in hindsight, for me, that is a powerful kind of example of what I understand true pouring out to others. How that looks like, because that's exactly what it was, man. We would just come and we would pour out ourselves. What's also interesting is that during breaks we would have tea breaks.
Okay, yeah.
Tea breaks are very important. Sri Lanka, we drink our tea all the time, and So we would come, we'd sit and chat, and every time we drink tea, so that was a time of community. That was a time of camaraderie.
Yeah.
That's a time where we just kind of shoot the breeze and until we're done, and then we'd go get back to work. It was these pauses. And so I've been thinking about the idea of pouring out, and thought about shramadana and tea, and just kind of reminded of just the capacity we as humans have to bless other people.
Yeah.
From the overflow of our lives. And so those are some of the thoughts that I've been thinking about when it comes to shramadana.
Oh, that's good. You talk about the capacity that we have to pour into others, but really the other-centered idea, the idea of giving to others unselfishly, is really hard to actually make your mindset into, because we're all selfish, we're all self-centered. So we're living in this selfish society, and our culture on every side is reminding us to hold on to what we have and not pour ourselves out, not give of our time, not give of our money, our talents, etc. So how does the Sri Lankan culture cultivate that concept?
Yeah, that's a good question, Carl. Well, for one, Sri Lanka is a very communitarian culture. It's very different from some of the cultures here in the West. America, where I stay and where I live here in San Diego. It's a very individualistic culture. Right. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but with any different cultures, you have strengths and pitfalls. And so in Sri Lanka, it's easy to have a communitarian perspective because of the culture, but also because of our history. Like we've had to really come together as a nation to emancipate ourselves from the British colonial rule. During our colonial history back in the 1800s. And so in order to get that thing done, the Sinhalese and the Tamils and the Muslims and the Tamils from India, we all had to come together. We had to come together to work together towards a common goal. But things like struggle, things like suffering and hardship, all those things kind of has forced us as a nation to be resilient and come together and to fix some things. So I think probably maybe a takeaway from that just piece that the question that you just brought out is, oftentimes in our own lives, I think struggles and hardships and problems have a way of forcing us to collaborate, integrate, and organize ourselves, ask the help of one another to actually get something done. And unity is a byproduct of that. Right.
Yeah. And that would help us get to the point where we can practice shramadana in our own communities.
Sure. Yeah.
as an individualistic society, when we're brought together by a struggle or a common goal, then that kind of unites us. We can then actually give unselfishly of our time, energy, and resources.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah. I was reading this morning, there's a couple of passages in Isaiah that talk about pouring out of ourselves. In Isaiah 58, the promise is made that if we pour ourselves out, God will fill us up. In light of that, you talk about in your newsletter that I mentioned earlier, you said, created in the imago Dei, or in the image of God, means to be poured out, to fill other cups with flavor and texture in a way that only your story can, to enhance the lived experience of the other, no strings attached, to love not for acceptance, but from acceptance. Can you elaborate on this sense of what it means to pour out your story?
Yeah, wow. Thank you for reminding me of that. Actually, I forgot that I even wrote that line. I believe that stories are very sacred. And what I mean by story is the sum total of your experiences, hardships, responses, reactions, the ebbs and flow of the things that have happened to you, and the way that you've reacted to life itself, which has kind of formed this kind of soundtrack to your life. That's your story.
Right.
Okay? In Christian circles, you call it a testimony. But when I talk about a story, I mean more than just your coming to Jesus experience, although that's included, that's part of the whole story.
Yeah.
But I take a broader, when I talk about a story, I talk about a much broader kind of view of story. Every single person that you meet has a story,
Hmm.
and that story is powerful, and it's absolutely sacred. And I say sacred is because if we believe that God has created people in his image, regardless of whether they accept that truth or not, it means that every single person has an imprint of the love of God, whether they realize it or not, because they're made in his image. Being made in God image for me means that people are created with an intrinsic capacity to not only receive love, but to also give love.
Hmm.
And to the extent that a human being can do both and live in a life with rhythms that allow that person to do both is the extent to which they can be whole or can be overflowing. You're receiving love, but then you're also giving love. And when I say and the story piece that to this whole situation is, I believe that to the extent that you know your story, to the extent that you embrace your unique life experiences, to the extent to which you can look back at your life and say, yeah, I'm not a mistake. I think all those things that I've gone through has purpose and meaning and value. And to the extent that you can actually embrace all of that is the extent to which now you can be liberated to pour into the stories of other people. Because until then, you will always see, or you'll at least say always have to kind of struggle with this tendency to relate to one another, not solely for the purpose of pouring into them, but relate to one another as potential uh, instruments with which you can now, that you can manipulate, that you can control, so that you feel good about yourself. You know,
Hmm.
and I see that happening a lot. On TikTok, for example, and I'm on social media. I get some of these hate comments where people would take the time to like write something really mean,
Yeah.
on my comment section, and it happens quite a bit, way more than I would care to share, really. And initially I was really getting bummed out about it.
Yeah.
That really, as an Enneagram 3, I don't know if anybody's into that. I uh, it really means a lot when someone compliments my work,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it's also really really hard when someone doesn't,
Yeah.
or doesn't feel appreciated. And so when you have these trolls and people just writing hate comments, you're like, man, it's the worst. But I think over the last couple of years or months, I would say, God has been taking me on this journey to see my story as not a liability but an asset. And how that relates to the comments is, now when I see some of those comments, the one of the things that I think about, or, I hope it continues to be as reflexive or intuitive, um, as it has been in the past. But one of the things that I think say to myself is, first of all, they're writing that mean stuff because they don't know who they are.
Yeah.
They don't know their story. Because if they really know their story, they wouldn't be taking the time to actually write something down. When all they could have done is just scroll by.
Yeah.
The second thing I tell myself is, they don't know my story.
Hmm.
You know, they only know the things that I choose to show.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they know everything about who I am.
And they only
So
know the
they don't
ones
know
that they've
their
actually engaged with. They may not have engaged with everything you've posted.
exactly. So even just a small sliver of my content, right?
Yeah.
And then and that actually puts things into perspective, where I say, God, please be with them, because they're probably in a very dark place for them to even
Yeah.
write that comment. So again, now coming full circle, I think pouring out from your story means that you are actually taking a posture of other-centered goodness, as defined by the love of God,
Hmm.
that's coming from a place of stability. It's coming from a place of celebrating your own story and your lived experiences in a meaningful way.
Yeah. No, that's good. I like that. I love the idea that you said there, to the extent that you know your story and you can then and embrace it, then you can be liberated to pour it into others. That's really powerful. So in this idea, let's get into chai a little bit. You said chai that is poured out only enhances its importance, for non-poured chai is worse than no chai. So what do you do in your own experience when you realize that you're holding some parts of your story back and not allowing it to overflow?
Yeah, wow, man. That's a great question. I think in many ways I'm still kind of on this journey of trying to figure that for myself. I would say I've been on this journey of trying to make meaning and trying to make sense of these parts of my story, which before I've either taken for granted or I've thought of them as handicaps because I couldn't fit in, because of my accent or my culture or this and that. I think I'm always trying to figure out like how much to share,
Right.
And there are parts of my story that I don't think I'm ready to share, and that's okay, And a part of growth is to also recognize that you don't have to share everything about yourself to other people, especially if it's coming from a place of seeking validation.
Yeah.
Especially it's coming from a place of seeking some sort of acceptance,
Right.
which I think can only come from God.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think for me, I try to keep that relationship with God front and center, and kind of take my cues from there. If God says, share this thing, I'll go ahead and share it. Especially if it's something in my life that I've felt like I've been freed from. Usually, those are the places where I go to find stories that I can share. So yeah, a good rule of thumb for me has been, if you're experiencing freedom in an area and that part of your life is not causing shame, you're kind of at a good place to now start thinking about if you need to share that thing with other people or not.
Right.
So that's kind of like a rule of thumb that I have for myself. It comes down to shame. So yeah, there are parts of my life that I'm still trying to figure out. There are parts of my life that I'm trying to make sense of with the help of the Holy Spirit and God. And so I'm on this journey, and the things that used to give me shame are now the things that I'm using right now to liberate other people, and to liberate other people from their shame.
Right.
But that takes process, that takes work, that takes commitment and consistency. And it's taken a long time for me to even share all these things with you. And so I'm just excited for all the other things that God will be able to free me from through the help of the Holy Spirit, so that from that place of weakness, His strength will be magnified.
Yeah. So talk to us from your experience as a chai expert. I understand that tea leaves generally don't have too much fragrance unless you get right up close to them. But when you add them to hot water, you make a cup of tea, the fragrance then fills the room. So, yeah, talk to us a little bit about that and how that applies to our stories.
Yeah, you're right. I think tea by itself, if you take a fresh piece of Camellia sinensis, which is the scientific, I guess the what do you call it, the botanical name of the tea plant, you can't smell it unless you like crush it, and even if you crush it, it's like a leafy green smell. Yeah. But tea has to be processed, dried, oxidized, fermented, in order for it to have the flavors that we taste at the moment of consumption. That just reminds me about the importance of process. Unless you're processed, unless you go through the stuff, unless you go through the hardships and the sufferings and the trials, I don't think people will have the relevant data points from which they can now share meaningful parts of the stories. Because the thing is, you need stress, man. You need, tea needs stress in order for us to taste its flavor. And so, yeah, the moment when we are stressed, when we go through some of the stuff that we go through in our lives, that's when we bump into like our capacities. And when we bump into our capacities, then we realize, oh, wow, I didn't realize like that I feel weakness here. And now when you have those moments, that's when you know that there's a story there. Because in the end of the day, bro, like a story for me is nothing but a tale of transformation.
Okay.
I think we overcomplicate what we mean by a story. It's a tale of transformation, and so a tale of transformation always has a beginning and an end, but the crux of that story is always a certain conflict. There's always some tension there. Like, what did you learn when you go through something? It's like you experienced a life. If you experienced a life change, you experienced a death in your family, you experienced a failure at work or whatever. These are all conflicts that you have to now kind of make sense of. And when you make sense of that and you come out of the other side, what do you have? You have a story. Right. So I think stresses and hardships in the process is absolutely necessary for stories. And I would even go as far as to say that the harder the process, the sweeter the story, man.
I like that. Like, I think of the stories that sometimes we try and tell around a campfire or tell to a friend. Unless there's a story of transformation, we're telling bad stories, and we've all heard a fair share of bad stories. But I like that idea of just it's a tale of transformation, and that's what's going to make a good story.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, to wrap this up, Kevin, what 2 questions can you leave us with to ponder this next week about how we can share our story, how we can pour ourselves out with others? What questions should we be thinking about?
That's a great question. Well, the first question that comes to my mind is a question that I had to take some time to sit down and process and answer. I can't remember where I got this question from, but it's an important question nonetheless. If you had the opportunity to talk to your 18-year-old self right now, what would you tell him or her? So just imagine yourself sipping some chai with your 18-year-old self, and let your mind flow.
Yeah.
And start writing down stuff, because when you do that, you'll realize a couple of things. At least for me, I realized a couple of things. First thing that I realized is I'm being too hard on myself.
Yeah.
Way too hard on myself. Second thing that I realized is that there was a refrain. There was a common theme that came over and over again, is just telling my 18-year-old self that, yeah, life is going to be hard. Life is going to be difficult, but you have absolutely no idea what's on the other side. What's on the other side of struggle? What's on the other side of stress? What's on the other side of difficulty is story.
And which is a tale of transformation.
Which is a tale of transformation. Yeah. So that's the first thing that I would tell people to process. And I think that's all I would say, because in that conversation with yourself or with your former self, or you'll also come to find out what you now value, like what are your current priorities right now.
Yeah.
And that's a really fun exercise. When you write down the certain things, you'll find out, hey, these are the things that I find important. And if you're a believer, if you're a Christian, then it'll be fun for you to see, where does God come into all of that stuff? Where does he fit? Where does he show up in your advice to your former self? Because that will now tell you or give you clues as to what you think about God now.
Yeah.
So I think that question, I think, was a very clarifying question for me, and hopefully it'll be clarifying to your listeners as well.
That's good. I just think of my 18-year-old self. I was expecting to be married with kids a couple of decades later, and now here I am, none of that, and living on the other side of the world from Australia. And I think one thing I'd tell myself is roll with the punches day in, day out, roll with the struggle. And yeah, that's good. Thanks so much, Kevin, for sharing with us. Really appreciate your wisdom and ideas. I love this idea of pouring out your story. That's what we're hoping to talk more about on this podcast. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, man. I think you've helped me to also process some things that I haven't really thought about in a while. So thank you for the opportunity for me to do that.
Thank you, Kevin, so much for spending this time with us, man. We really, really appreciate it. Know this guy is a busy dude. And you can follow him at Cross Culture Christian on both TikTok and Instagram. He'd love to be your friend and interact with you on there. Share his content, and you might just catch a nice cup of chai.
That's true. Yeah.
So, Karl, what hit you in that interview that you did with him?
One of the things that stuck out to me was something he said right at the beginning, this idea of how inputs are more important than outputs if we're chasing the overflowing life. I really like that idea because it highlights how the overflow is really something that happens naturally from the wells we're drinking from, the inputs. We talk on here about choosing to overflow. We say that every week. But I think what I'm learning from Kevin is that in order to make that consistent choice, we have to go back to the source, go back to those inputs.
I really liked the input notion because it makes me realize, A, I have control over my inputs.
Right. That's true.
So it's like, what sources am I allowing into my life to give me the ability to have the overflow? And that can really honestly be from what you're eating to who you're interacting with, what you're watching.
Yeah.
It's like anything you're ingesting. And right now, I think we're super saturated in terms of our media ingestion. So films, music, I get to a point where I get fidgety and I just flip my phone on immediately because I've habituated that. But I think even that's a problem to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it is. It's monitoring what goes in. Like Kevin said, the 3 stories that he said was really influential in him bringing himself to where he is today were relationships. It's surrounding yourself with the right people.
Yeah.
The stories of his community and mentors and the friends who are pouring into him.
Yeah.
Then that allowed him to pour out into others.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize the impact it is for a foreigner to come to a new country. You know, I really resonated with his story because we came to America in 1989. I was 2.5 years old. My dad had, I think, $2,000. He had sold all of our furniture, our car, everything he could.
Wow.
That's all the cash he had. And within 2 months, I mean, my dad looked into the kind of little spot he had put some of the cash in, and he's like, "We have only a few $100s. We can't even afford to live in this apartment complex anymore." So we moved to kind of the ghetto of Chicago. We moved from this nicer suburb area where we had an apartment. And man, it's tough. And without people, relationships, like Kevin talks about, certain people took him in, loved on him, gave him free housing. That was similar to us. I mean, my dad got certain jobs doing construction and getting free food and meals. I mean, it was just a big deal. And so you stand on the shoulders of many people in your life in order for you to have the ability to overflow. And I think there needs to be a sense of gratitude, gratefulness on many of our parts to recognize, you know, I'm so much more blessed than I realize. And I probably don't need to be complaining about X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a journey, isn't it? The process, especially for you and Kevin as immigrants.
Whoa. You and Kevin, as in you're not an immigrant, Karl?
Hey, I'm a non-immigrant at this stage.
Oh, brother. Okay.
I'm living here for now. We'll see where the future takes me. But something I also related to with what Kevin was saying was how he says he's on a journey through life, not just internationally, but how we have stories in our past that we're trying to make sense of. Maybe it's trauma, maybe it's broken relationships, whatever these things are that we're trying to figure out. I think oftentimes we can fall into the trap of counting them as a handicap, something that is holding us back from where we want to, something we want to achieve.
Yeah. And that's usually the reality for many of us because we feel shame for those things that have held us back, as opposed to looking at as not a liability, but actually something with limitless potential for you to grow and to influence people in because of what you went through.
Yeah. And so you have this idea where Kevin was talking about overcoming that shame that you mentioned. And then what he's doing now is he's using those things that used to give him shame and using that story to help liberate other people.
Yeah.
Which I think is really a powerful overflow idea.
Yes. From limitation to liberation. I love
and
that.
Education.
And education. Ooh, this rhymes.
Well, let's wrap up with the question that he posed to us. If you had the opportunity, Philip, to talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you say?
Wow.
Think about that this week as we close. We hope you've been blessed. We hope you've learned something along the way from these stories we've shared this season. And we're really excited for season 4. So stay with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, friends, I also just want to leave you with this thought. Out of this season, you heard different stories of different people, but I want you to be encouraged in this way, that your story of your life carries huge impact. So share it. The book of Revelation says that you will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And so there is something powerful to you speaking out your story, your journey to other people. Don't discredit it as simply being simplistic or not really having much to it. There is so much to your story. Think about it, play with it, do something with your journey. Don't just let it be something that stays with you. Speak out about it, share it, and let others be healed and transformed through your journey.
Liberated.
Yeah. Well, we want to leave you as we always do with a prayer. And so let me do that right now for us. Amazing God, speak into those spaces where we feel shame and bring about a regeneration, that we can use those spaces now for healing in other people's lives. God, may our stories, coupled with you, bring true change and transformation to everyone we get to share them with. And I also pray, God, that you would speak life, healing, power, blessing, joy, hope into our friends as we are separated. In Jesus' name, amen. Friends, as we always say, today, choose to overflow.
Hey, thanks so much for listening in on our conversation today. If something we said made you think, or maybe you just want to say hello or give some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at hello@choosetooverflow.com. You can find us on Instagram at choosetooverflow, or check out our website, choosetooverflow.com, where you can find more content, including a reflection guide for today's episode to help you take the conversation further. That's choosetooverflow.com. We also want to thank the Loma Linda University Church for their support of this project. And if this was helpful to you, please leave us a review, share with a friend or 3, and subscribe to stay connected. We'll be releasing new episodes every Monday. Thanks again for listening. We hope you choose to overflow this week. Let's chat again soon.